Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all from the TFO team. We are delighted to have you with us tonight. At TFO, we are passionate about sharing and celebrating the world of cinema, and it's always a pleasure to gather with fellow film enthusiasts. Founded in June 2020 by Dr. Geeta Vishwanath and Professor Nigila, TFO has grown into a vibrant, thriving community of cinephiles. Every Saturday at 9 p.m. on Zoom, we come together to explore global cinema through member curated film screening and engaging discussions. Over the years, we have been privileged to host eminent filmmakers such as Abarna Sen, Amol Palekar, Girish Khasravalli, and Adur Gopalakrishnan. Our journey has also included themed film festivals ranging from East European and Iranian cinema to women's cinema, as well as our annual smartphone short film contest to mark TFO's anniversary. And more recently, we hosted two landmark international seminar on Indian cinema. Tonight's section, we will be discussing the Bengali film Sri Sopan Kumariyar Badami Hyenar Kobole translation in the clutches of a brown hyena, and the discussion will be led by Dr. Parichay Patra, assistant professor at the School of Liberal Arts, Indian Institute of Technology, Jodhpur, and coordinator of the Digital Humanities Interdisciplinary Research Platform at the same institution. His recent publications include Cinema and the Indian National Emergency, Histories and Afterlives, Rethinking Radical Latin American Cinema, Frontier of South Asian Culture, Cine ni Lav Diaz, a long take on the Filipino auteur, and among others. We look forward to a deeply engaging and thought provoking session this evening, enriched by the presence of so many distinguished participants. At this point, I'm delighted to hand over the session, beginning with our lead discussant. Over to you, sir.
Thanks so much, Krishna Priya, for these kind words of introduction. I hope I'm audible. I
Yes,
hope all
sir.
of you can hear me. Thank you. Yeah, so earlier, as far as I can recall, Talking Films Online. Firstly, I'd like to thank Talking Film Online and Professor Nikhila, Dr. Geeta Vishwanath for inviting me. I suggested this particular film because earlier I think you had a discussion on Debaloy Bhattacharya's Dracula set, which he made before this. So during a kind of chat session with Professor Nikhila and Dr. Geeta, I suggested that there should be some discussion on this strange, crazy film that he made after this. And no equivalent of this I can think of in contemporary Indian cinema. So there is a problem in introducing this film. Many parts of it are so culturally grounded, so immersed in certain kind of pulp fiction tradition and pop literature, pop publishing, printing tradition of Bengal, that those references might be lost on an audience coming from a different region. But notwithstanding that, the film is so interesting and engrossing, so enjoyable that even without getting some of the references, the audience may develop a certain kind of fascination for it. In fact, I organized a screening of it here in Jodhpur, in my institution, and quite a few of our students who come from different parts of the country liked it immensely, those who watched it. So what I will do, I'll start with the basic background of this, what kind of pulp fiction this film takes up, within what kind of a historical context it tries to locate itself, and why so. And from that point onwards, I would gradually move towards a few more cinematic issues that I found interesting and often challenging as a film studies person. I hope I'm perfectly audible. Now, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to introduce this film. The reason being, I'm not a popular literature, popular culture scholar. I don't really have much engagement with the specific historical context that it hints at, even though the film is obviously set in contemporary times, as you can see from the way it presents the city of Calcutta. Uh, but the kind of literature that it talks about dates back to its origin in the 50s and the way it continued and became very popular in the 70s. I've come to that. But even before that, to be honest, this kind of pulp fiction, chapbook production with overtly sexualized, erotic art and crime stories, all these things actually, even before Shapon Kumar, I would come to the point of Shapon Kumar. All these things date back to the 19th century and the concept of Bottala printing. Some of you may heard the term Bottala referring to that underbelly of 19th century Calcutta, kind of infamous in quote unquote Bhadralok circles for its production of obscenity, certain kind of chapbooks, uh, erotica, certain kind of pulp fiction, crime stories, um, Munjika, and so on. And you would find quite a few historians and chroniclers of the 19th century, those who took an interest in Bengali print culture of the time, talking about this phenomenon. In Bengali, of course, quite a few people wrote on it, Sukumar Sen, Sripantho, and many others, if I'm not mistaken, and Gautam Bhadra, the most well-known among these historians. Gautam Bhadra published a book in Bengali called Nara Bottolai Jai Kobar, which is about this Bottala printing publication and the larger history of this popular print culture, for which he won Ananda Puraskar. I'm not sure whether it has been translated or not. So, so that is a specific history. And it has this idea of Bottala printing always remained outside the purview of the upper caste Bengali Bhadralok. This mode of publishing industry was dominated by uh, the, the so-called subaltern houses. Capital was invested and it was actively participated in this mode of publishing. Active participation came from Bengali Muslims as well. You would find writings on that. And this chapbook production business was always criticized as low life, low quality, poor quality um, stuff. So it started with that kind of chapbooks, better known for its or infamous for its so-called obscenity, and then gradually that led to certain kind of popular crime fiction publications. Some of the earliest Bengali crime fiction writers, Priyanath Mukherjee, I think, and Pachkori, they got their works published from such places. Many years later, even in the say mid 20th century, before and after, or a few years after Indian independence, pulp fiction writers, those who were not part of the larger Bengali literary canon, have always been a part of this, this larger, I would say, fraternity of popular print culture. Shapon Kumar is an interesting phenomenon here. His family, Shapon Kumar was obviously his pen name. His real name was Somarendranath Pandey. whose family came from the eastern part of Bengal, which is now Bangladesh. And after the partition, they lost their livelihood. Um, Shapon Kumar came to Calcutta to study medicine. He was a medical student, S.N. Pandey, was studying in Arjikor Medical College in Calcutta. Not sure whether he actually completed his medicine degree or not. There are different versions around it, different narratives, primarily because of the lack of resources due to the partition. And I would say he took a very different occupation for that. He started writing this pulp stories that became massively popular. But he went on to write many other things, including popular astrology books that were equally popular, for which he picked up a very different pen name again, Trivrigu. So those popular astrology books are still sold on Calcutta streets, Calcutta footpath. He wrote a lot of so-called popular books on quote-unquote sexology, Bengali books on medicine for the medicine students who come from a vernacular medium background. He wrote on poultry farming and whatnot. Hundreds of books he published. But he never became a part of the literary canon, primarily because of his status as part of this popular print culture and the low life setting within which that operated, and the way it was, shunned and abandoned by the Bhadralok. In the 1960s and 70s, his detective fiction, the kind of detective fiction that he used to write under the pen name of Shapon Kumar, became immensely popular. And it's quite interesting that even now, copyright issues are there over his multiple literary and other kind of productions. In fact, his only son passed away a few years back. Shapon Kumar himself passed away in 2001. And now, as popular newspaper reports suggest, a lot of legal dispute over inheritance and some court cases are happening, because of which no one knows who holds the copyright. So as if it's kind of floating. This idea of Shapon Kumar's ambiguous identity as a massively popular writer, but perpetually banished from the idea of any kind of canonization. It remains. It created a certain kind of free-flowing identity, going beyond the world of IP rights and the related, issues of the capital. So, sorry. In recent times, Shapon Kumar's, at least his crime fiction, these stories have been compiled and published by a Bengali publisher. But most of his other works remain largely circulated within the underbelly of the city, on the streets, without any recognition of the mass production that happened. Now, and in recent times, one major Bengali fiction writer, Binod Ghoshal, wrote a novel, a kind of biographical novel on Shapon Kumar. It's very suggestively titled Superman in Sita, which can be literally translated as the father of the Superman, which obviously refers to this Deepak Chatterjee Ratanlal duo that he created, performing all sorts of actions bordering on absurdity, things which distinguish Shapon Kumar from other canonical literary detectives like Byomkesh and Feluda. That's why when Debaloy Bhattacharya wanted to, and that's what I read in his interviews and other reports published in the dailies, when he wanted to make this film, it was very clear that it will not be a direct adaptation or a literal adaptation of any of Swapan Kumar's stories. To be very honest, uh, I would say there is a reason why he did this in all probability. I'll come to that point later. Uh, there's a specific political intention as I want to read into this decision. And as you can see throughout this film, sometimes repetitively, sometimes it becomes kind of imposed. It may bore you at times. Uh, the Deepak Chatterjee figure on screen, played by Abid Chatterjee, Bengali actor, he consistently, uh, you know, complains about him not being part of the literary canon, him being different from the detectives of the Bhadralok. Like, and he keeps on referring to Bomkesh and Felida. Right? Bomkesh stories were written by Sharabendu Bandyopadhyay, and Bomkesh have been adapted multiple times in multiple languages. And Felida, of course, by Satyajit Ray. So throughout the film, you can find references to them. This is also I would say, very satirical take in a way, because Abid Chatterjee, the star who plays Deepak Chatterjee on screen here, acted as Bomkesh as well as Felida um, in multiple adaptations of Bomkesh and Felida stories. It is definitely a conscious choice on the filmmaker's part to cast Abid Chatterjee in that role, who himself kept on playing Bomkesh and Felida on screen in recent times. And on the other hand, he consistently mocks that here. At the pretext of complaining about his his own low life status. Now, when it comes to Swapan Kumar's original stories, uh, stories that were immensely popular, especially in the 60s and 70s, and I was going through the accounts of some of the Bengali, commentators, journalists who read such stories in their formative years when they were school kids. Uh, they talked about the specific kind of illustration uh, that these stories came up with. Certain kind of illustrations, garish colors, and then within the book, certain black and white images, certain images bordering on eroticism, and to heighten that effect, Swapan Kumar used to come up with this. Swapan Kumar or his publisher, they used to come up with this, publicity strategy that on the cover of such popular crime stories, they used to add a sentence for college students, only for college students. In Bangla, college students only. Obviously, that referred to the idea of an A certification, right? Adult certification in a certain way. Because they knew it for sure that it will actually be consumed by school kids. And they would develop certain kind of fascination towards the erotic portions of the story, along with the typical hard-boiled um, American crime model that it picked up. They would find themselves attracted to it because of such kind of a publicity strategy. So, as it seems, Debaloy Bhattacharya, when he wanted to create this, it's obviously not an adaptation, and at the same time, I would say, he created something very different. So those of you who have seen his earlier works like Dracula Fair, I'm not talking about whether there's any obvious connection or not. I'm not going towards that. But it's pretty clear that as a filmmaker, he is interested in the long 1970s radical leftist movement, militancy, and so on. In this film, you can see him constantly referring to many modes of insurrection and militancy, anti-colonial struggle, and occasionally referring to the 70s as well, which is very different in spirit from what Swapan Kumar used to write. If you read some of Swapan Kumar's work prevalent in the 60s, especially after the Sino-Indian War or Indo-China War of 1962, you would find in many of his stories, to be honest, in story after story, there will always be exoticization of Chinese or other East Asian villains, certain kind of gangsters. Most of these are happening, some kind of plot being hatched in the Chinatown of Calcutta, which is constantly exoticized and peopled by the other, the consistent other, and some kind of larger international conspiracy getting hatched against the Indian state, and Deepak Chatterjee and Ratan Lal, the duo, they're fighting on behalf of the nation state against such exoticized villains. As I said, it became a popular trope, especially after 1962, 1962 onwards. So that was what Swapan Kumar's Pulp Fiction actually was. At least some of it functioned in that mode. Here we can see the filmmaker turning the table upside down. The exoticization is there, as you can see in the character of Bhattacharya, the villain played by Gautam Haldar, who is better known as a comedian, a very popular comedian, mostly associated with Calcutta stage. He's a thespian and occasionally, acts in cinema as well. So you can see Gautam Haldar, who is better known for his exaggeration, certain kind of exaggerated expressions, large, broad exaggerated expressions on stage. He is doing the same, that mode of acting that he does on stage. He is doing the same on screen. In fact, he is kind of, popular as well as infamous for his exaggerated acting method. But here, they're quite, I'll say, they suit the character that he plays here, that exoticized Chinese villain. The film actually reminds me of the way, in a very different manner, in a different context, of course, but the way in Detective Byomkesh Bakshi, the Hindi film, the Byomkesh stories were destabilized and kind of deconstructed with similar kind of exoticization of the quote-unquote yellow peril, the East Asian threat. Here we can see that happening throughout the film, and unfortunately, even in the subtitled version, which you have seen, and the version that is circulating on some of the OTTs, local as well as national, I think it's on Hoichoi, which is a Bengali OTT platform, or I should rather use the term VOD, video on demand platform. I think it's also on Jio Hotstar, if I'm not mistaken. None of these versions have subtitles for the songs, which is a great need for the audience that do not speak or understand the language. The songs, unfortunately, they're completely lost. There are no subtitles for the songs, not so far. But we can see that throughout the film, he keeps on picking up elements from such chapbooks, certain kind of print culture. He makes it visible, tangible, tactile on screen. The kind of garish colors that the filmmaker has used, the titles, the way the titles appear on screen, the way the frames freeze during action, and they take a cartoonish shape. And throughout the film, that tirade against the Bhadralok detectives and on the larger, I'd say upper caste culture continues in a way. That's why at least two major songs a Tagore song, Phule Phule Dhole Dhole, and Mohini Chaudhury's song, which was very well known during the anti-colonial struggle, Muktira Mondira Shopano Tale, both being part of uh, larger Bengali urban culture. These two have been put into bizarre situations. As you can recall that sequence where Ratanlal and Deepak Chatterjee appears all of a sudden and starts, shooting down the villains, the baddies, like 20-25 minutes into the film, and the titles start appearing, the credits start appearing in garish colors, phrases, frames freeze, and exactly at that point you can hear the Tagore song put into in a completely different bizarre use. And much later, when that mad scientist villain working for the state, obviously with his assistant, they have cornered um, the woman and the kid. Exactly at that point, Deepak Chatterjee appears from the helicopter, just like a paratrooper, and starts shooting them down. Exactly at that point, that anti-colonial song, Muktira Mondira Shopanatari, starts getting played in the background. So the film is full of such elements. And if I keep on talking, of course, it picks up elements from specific kind of sci-fi. Remember recall that sequence where that strange kind of spaceship appears. Obviously, it gives you a sense of a cheap imitation of that kind of cinema, and you can see the so-called hero and the heroine duo on rooftop talking between themselves on strange stuff, and then that deliberate poor imitation of a spaceship starts circling them on sky, and you can hear a song. Throughout the film, you can find such sequences. I would just talk about two things. Firstly, the way there's this idea of flow throughout the film. Things keep on floating. Um, Quite literally, the characters, the three people, Deepak Chatterjee, Ratanlal, and the woman, um, they find themselves on Bay of Bengal in a boat, sailing helplessly, and then there's a blast. But even before that, you can see figures like that of Ratanlal floating through the river, and uh, literally yellow pages from such chapbooks of Shapun Kumar flowing around. I started with this idea of Shapun Kumar's identity remaining kind of ambiguous, kind of mysterious, and until this point he has not been canonized. How his works remain, they're into this legal um, battle of lack of copyright, and no one knows who holds the rights. I was just reading about it in some of the reports on Shapun Kumar. This free-flowing nature, as if it is the right literally rests with this quote unquote low life reading public in the underbelly of the city. That is exactly, in a literal sense, getting portrayed on screen in its manner of making it rather free flowing. The narrative itself, literally and metaphorically, flows. There's one more point I want to emphasize on. As I said, I'm not a popular culture scholar. I'm not into this 19th century print culture, and definitely not into hard-boiled crime fiction that much. So perhaps I cannot do much justice to these aspects. I just wanted to offer you the context. But there's something that keeps on, playing in my mind as a film person, that what kind of an aesthetic choice the filmmaker made on screen to come up with this rather surreal, absurd story. I can see that throughout the film, and this is what attracts me the most, you can see repetitions, multiple repetitions occurring all the time. The story is getting repeated, certain dialogues getting repeated. Think of those sequences where the heroine, she keeps on dying on street, she keeps on getting shot at, and much later we come to know that, and those corpses vanish, right? The corpses vanish into thin air. Much later we come to know that she keeps on, mimicking that moment of dying. She is actually not dying, and that keeps on happening. And there are many such things. Think of that sequence where it visually quotes Achyut Kanna, uh, quite infamous for that kissing scene on screen. That can, I'm not going into that. That can actually take us towards the studio era of Indian cinema, and why there was no kiss on screen for a very long time, on which Madhav Prasad famously wrote, devoted a chapter of his book and that article, Cinema and the Desire for Modernity, why there's no kiss on screen for a very long time, barring this, such exceptions. I'm not even going towards that point. But think of, Abhi Shruti duo, the hero and the heroine, repeating that on screen, that kiss, breaking the record. And throughout the film, you can see something happening. Then that thing, that issue getting resolved. Tapan Kumar, as literally as the author, intervenes, and exactly at that point, that entire action is either repeated or it is completely transformed. Something else happens. So that makes me wonder what kind of thoughts the filmmaker had in mind while making such choices on screen, because um, I think it reminds me of someone like Raymond Bellour, the French film theorist, and several others actually, Krista Metz and so many others, who talk consistently about the idea of repetition on screen. And this is what Bellour, so Bellour wrote this article called Cine Repetition. And throughout his book, The Analysis of Film, he kept on talking about the idea of repetition, which is fundamental to the idea of cinema itself. So he talked about external repetition, because the film is constantly replayed through its exhibition, distribution, multiple screenings, or during the shooting, there are multiple takes, always, even in documentaries. That's what Bellow talks about. But that is external repetition, and internally, it's full of this grand syntagmatic, where consistently, there are continuations, repetitions, and resolutions. That's how the cinematic text, the textual system is constructed. I would like to conclude with the last point that Belur made on cine repetition, where after talking about this internal repetition within cinema, he gets out of the screen and talks about one more external repetition, where he says how the audience, in their dreams and within the cinema hall, they relive, they repeat certain kind of fantasy, right? Um, like to repeat an original fantasy. That these are his words, So he refers to Metz and Thierry Kunsel. How the objective of the fiction film is to organize a scenography of desire, wherein the spectator may experience a certain kind of, this opportunity to repeat an original fantasy. Without going into the details of that, we can see how this film operates exactly on that level, externally and internally. If we think of those sequences where the heroine keeps on dying and coming back to life, think of that as retakes during a shooting, and at the same time, the entire thing is repeating the fantasy that we always had, right? Or multiple fantasies, because this is exactly what Tapan Kumar's pulp fiction was. We keep on, so those of us who read the stories, the original stories, we keep on, finding ourselves within it, within that the cinema hall, while on screen, such fantasies keep on getting repeated. That takes us to the integral point of cinema itself, perhaps. That's my take on this, and for me, this is the most important part of this film. This constant, this continuation, repetition, and the way that leads to resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now the platform is open for the other participants to comment on your views and all. Geeta ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Parichay, so much for that introduction. And as you rightly said, I know it is so rooted in Bengali allusions to popular culture and Rabindra Sangeet, etc. It was very nice that you kind of contextualized the whole film for people like us. For me, of course, what was really fascinating about the film was its form, its aesthetic, and the way it I think it very pointedly shows us, the constructed nature of a narrative, almost in a Brechtian style, where it kind of dismantles cinema as realism and shows how cinematic narratives are constructed. So that was something that was really fascinating for me. Thank you. Thank you so much for suggesting this film. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Geeta. I'm so glad that
Thank you, ma'am. Nikhila ma'am.
Right.
Uh, so Parichay, thanks so much for suggesting this, totally wacky kind of a film. But also I think which sets you thinking along, different kinds of tracks. For one, I must admit, your contextualizing was very helpful. I did read up a little bit, because otherwise it was quite impossible to make sense of everything, including the title. With your introduction, the contextualizing it with the kind of popular literature and Botala printing and all that, I think that was very useful. For me, what I thought, what really captured my attention was the film adaptation. Here is a kind of it's a kind of meta narrative, or a process of thinking about adaptation itself, where generally we think of the author as an extra textual figure who's outside of the realm of the text, and therefore is someone who kind of controls the characters. Here he's not just on the periphery. He moves into the so-called lower narrative levels and becomes a character himself. While the character, that he creates, the detective, is virtually at times dictating things to the author. So one would think that the hierarchy is between the author and the characters, and the characters do the bidding of the author. Here, there are, as we see in the film, the character virtually, demands you should do this, and all those references to other, more acceptable middle class detectives, more acceptable to the Bengali middle class. So it's like a refrain to also in some ways blackmail the author into giving him a different kind of role, or make his life, make him come back to life, or whatever. So that kind of a kind of mutual exchange that happens between author and character, which destabilizes the hierarchy between author and character that we know, and also makes the character, the detective character, at various points in time, virtually authoring his own destiny. And there are points at which somebody reminds him towards the end, you're only a character, and so all that was very, very fascinating. Like Geeta said, it is about the constructedness of the narrative, but it is also about the process of narrativizing itself, where someone who exists only in the realm of a lower narrative realm is virtually transformed and transferred to the higher realms. So this kind of osmosis between character and author, I thought, was very, very fascinating. Yes, there are kitsch elements, or so I thought. Just by looking at the colors, I don't know if everything that came on the screen got English translations. So I'm not very sure of how much of the film came to me through the English translations. But a great experience watching this. And in some sense, Dracula Sir was a somewhat easier film, I thought, compared to this, because this was so context specific and seemed to be so elusive, many of which one does not know if one is not out of the context. One is not part of the context. So yeah, these are some of my reactions. Thank you so much for suggesting this film and this fascinating filmmaker. Thank you, Parichay.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else?
I'd like to offer some comments on what
Yes, sir.
Lena's said. Firstly, so as you rightly pointed out, throughout the film, we can see the character contradicting the author, which for me it's a literal manifestation of in a satirical way, of course, what the filmmaker did. As I mentioned, that Shravan Kumar, quite a few of Shravan Kumar's original stories, especially those that were written during and after in the China War of 1962, they're hyper-nationalist popular stories where we see this exoticized Chinese villains hatching some plots and Deepak Chatterjee sort of siding with the state. Here, on the contrary, and that's why it's definitely not an adaptation. We can see as it happens towards the end, Deepak Chatterjee fights the state, right? That's how he is represented, and quite literally, there's a dialogue that mentions we need this low-life detective, not the Bhadralok detective, in our fight with the state. So it's quite a departure, and this has been highlighted in some of the not many, but maybe one or two reviews of the film, that this is a conscious departure from the film. From Shravan Kumar's literary world. So he is making Shravan Kumar's bizarre figures, I won't say characters, figures alive on screen, but ideologically it's a departure from Shravan Kumar's world. We can see that happening literally on screen as the character keeps on contradicting the author. There are certain things which I could not mention during my introduction to the film. So Shravan Kumar's stories were so bizarre and absurd. At times, in fact, his stories are mostly in popular parlance compared to that of, say, American hard-boiled fiction by, say, Robert Leslie Bellum. who wrote the stories of Dan Turner and other hardcore, hard-boiled detectives. Again, I'm not really into this kind of literature, but in popular parlance, and as Shrapan Kumar was often mocked, Shrapan Kumar has often been mocked for writing such crazy, absurd stuff for mostly school kids, and for selling that erotic quotient of the story. Certain aphorisms, certain utterances associated with Shrapan Kumar's literature have become rather immortal in popular parlance. Like, even though you may not find them actually in his stories, but they're in popular saying, certain absurd aphorisms are part of the Shrapan Kumar literary world. Like, we keep on hearing about how in some of Shrapan Kumar's stories there are sequences where Deepak Chatterjee appears literally with two loaded revolvers in two hands and a burning torch in another hand. So that became obviously it's a satirical reference. The detective having two loaded revolvers, he's constantly shooting, and then on another hand he has a torch. So, but it is very clear that this sentence, and it is often satirically referred to in the film, right? But it does not appear in any of Shrapan Kumar's books. Recently, the publisher who has come up with the collected works of Shrapan Kumar, Lalmati Prakashan, who owns that publishing house, in an interview mentioned this, that when we compiled all these Deepak Chatterjee detective stories to come up with that volume, we came to know that this thing never appeared in any of the stories. But because of his bizarre occurrences, people kept on associating his stories with such absurd formations. And Debaloy Bhattacharya, he keeps on sort of, relying on, I would say, that mode of absurdity that has always been there. So these things we kept on hearing about as we grew up, how bad these stories are, how illogical, irrational, and poorly written literature this is. And that's why it remains uncanonized, right? So all these popular utterances associated with Shrapan Kumar's stories, Deepak Chatterjee coming down like a paratrooper, shooting in both his hands, he's being an ambidextrous detective and holding a torch on the other. So all these things became part of the Shrapan Kumar world, and Debaloy, tried to recreate that satirically, mockingly, but at the same time, through that reproduction of that world and those repetitions that I talked about. Debaloy, obviously here also, as I can see, and all of us can see, he came up with a very different ideological standpoint, very different from what Shrapan Kumar's stories meant. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else need to add on or say something about the film?
I have a question, if I may ask.
Yes, sir. Sure.
Yeah, hi Parichay, this is Dibbo
Hi.
over here.
Dibbo.
Thank you very much for the talk, and I mean, it's actually I'm extremely thankful to you for raising this issue, because I remember being fascinated and rather amazed by the film when I first saw it. Anyway, I have two questions. So probably you have addressed this already. I'm afraid I was a little bit in and out through your speech, but might just be worth a little more mentioning. The first is the cinematography, or the general look of the film. As you must have observed, it depends a lot on the neon aesthetic. Now, the neon aesthetic and everything, you do know it much better than I do, is that this 80s, it's more or less a retro 80s vibe that is extremely prevalent in especially Hollywood culture these days. In fact, a certain section of European film industry has also fallen prey to this repetitive aesthetic. We have seen it again and again, which, to my view, does not quite go as far as, if I'm talking about a perfect balance between the content and the aesthetic is concerned. I don't think Shopun Kumar imagined his stories to take place in a 80s kitschy urban periphery. But there must be a reason why Debaloy has chosen it. I'm just trying to find the reason. Would be really grateful if you help me out. That's question number one. And the question number two is probably even more abstract and probably more mentioned by you throughout your speech. Probably I couldn't pick it up. Is Shopun Kumar's stories are naturally, they are more or less more than intentional pastiche. I think they're incidental pastiches in the sense that they're simply shoddily written pulp fiction stories, which of course had its own like tremendous popularity for a certain part of time. But then, it's not the Shravan Kumar's stories were of intentionally reflecting on its own absurdity. That was not the case, to my understanding. So my question is, Debaloy's film, naturally, Badami Hyenar Kobole, naturally, it takes a different path. So this path is that it takes the stories in his, the Shopun Kumar stories that are part of his narrative, the cinematic narrative, is actually conscious of their own absurdity. They refer to themselves again and again, their own impossibilities, the three hands paradox that you just mentioned as well. Is this like, but why is this? Why Debaloy has chosen this path for himself? These are the two questions. I'm sorry if I didn't make any sense.
So thank you so much, Tipo. So let me address them one by one. Regarding this neon look, obviously, if Debaloy were present here, he could have given a better answer regarding the material conditions of production. Why Debaloy and his cinematographer, I can't recall the name of the cinematographer right now, why they did choose that neon look, that 80s retro look, as you pointed out. I can provide some sort of a response to it. I'm reminded of certain filmmakers working in world cinema at the moment who preferred that while creating something scandalous, something intentionally pastiche. They often prefer that neon look. So, and in fact, some of these filmmakers have, an impact on Bengali filmmakers like Q, for that matter. Q, who is quite infamous for making, rather quote unquote outrageous films. And when Q emerged with Gandu and some of his other works, they were viciously critiqued. So while talking to Q, I found out that Q is fond of the works of someone like, say, Nicholas Winding Refn. And your question, Dibbo, reminds me directly about, I'm not fond of that kind of cinema, but it reminds me of Nicholas Winding Refn's The Neon Demon, the film that he made in 2016 about certain kind of, 2016 as in Neon Demon. It's about certain kind of showbiz, the world of glamour of yesteryear, and the violence within it in a pastiche mode, and use that retro look, that neon lighting that you were talking about. So I'm not sure if Debaloy as a filmmaker is fond of this particular model, or whether he has seen the Neon Demon and other films of that sort. Of course, I'm also reminded of Gaspar Noé, for that matter. Yes, works of Gaspar Noé. So, but there can be an aesthetic connection between this and the kind of films that I'm talking about. That's my explanation. And we can, in fact, one of the TFO members proposed that he would be able to invite Debaloy. Maybe on some other time we can have an interaction with the filmmaker to find out if he is really sort of in a dialogue with, say, Nicholas Winding Refn or Gaspar Noé or a few others. So, And the second thing about Shapon Kumar's literature being unintentionally pastiche and Debaloy's film, um, Debaloy's film banking on that and using it with a purpose, with an intention on screen. Yeah, I think I referred to this as I was towards the end of my, if I got your question correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, towards the end of my introduction to the film, I was talking about this endless repetitions within the film, this repetition, resolution, and uh, uh, the way it functions. I refer to Raymond Bellour and how externally and internally repetition is at the heart of cinema itself. So here we can see there's those intentional repetitions within the film, and perhaps that can refer to the mode of its making as well. So I would say there are many things about Badami Hyenar Kobole that satirizes the original at times and builds itself up on that, on the gap that remained for a long time. Like I referred to the ideological difference between the two, Shapon Kumar's work being hyper-nationalist pulp fiction in the 60s, and here it goes to a, that might also be the reason why when he's, when he's making a film on Shapon Kumar's literature, Shapon Kumar's literary world and figures, instead of putting it in its proper context, instead of making it a quote-unquote period piece, he's placing it within contemporary Calcutta, and then he's creating a kind of discrepancy within that by creating that retro look from the 80s. So these are my responses, and in fact, I think the title itself is quite satirical. So the full title is Sri Shapon Kumarer Badami Hyenar Kobole, in the clutches of the Badami Hyena by Sri Shapon Kumar, while we know for sure that Shapon Kumar did not write anything like this. Badami Hyena never appears as a character, as a figure. So this is not Shapon Kumar's production. This is Debaloy Bhattacharya reimagining the Shapon Kumar corpus. So I think, yeah, that unintentional pastiche as opposed to Debaloy's intentional pastiche, all these things sort of needed, necessitated the retro look that you were talking about. So in a way, the two are connected. In fact, it's interesting that you raised the issue of the 80s retro look, because the 80s films are, you wrote on the 80s, you published on the 80s films in a different context, in the context of Bombay cinema, of course, but they were infamous for their lack of quote-unquote taste, right? And within the discourse of cinema studies, we know how taste, certain kind of cinematic taste is associated with certain kind of privilege. So you yourself wrote on it in the context of the 80s cinema. So we can see that as this film offers its comments on on certain kind of literary cultural taste, the privilege associated with it, and the kind of taste that went against the privilege, it perhaps found it safer to take that, to adopt that 80s retro look. 80s being a particular decade in Indian popular cinema, almost in multiple industries, I guess, associated with certain kind of quote-unquote bad cinema, bad production values. Sorry for this long winding answer. I'm not sure if I have been able to respond to what you just said.
It's absolutely wonderful what you said, and it allays my doubt to a very great extent. Thank you very much, Parichay.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else need to contribute any ideas? Madhurima ma'am? Yeah, Madhurima ma'am, do you have anything to add on?
Not really, nothing new to add on, but I really enjoyed watching the film and the kind of way the film played with the idea of what is supposed to be a quote-unquote Bhadralok's literature and quote-unquote Chotolok's literature, and how it presents it in the contemporary context when the very idea of Bhadralok in itself is a is a debated category, and there are many scholars who have wrote about that the idea of Bhadralok has in itself dissolved with the new technologies coming in. So, in the way I have liked or enjoyed watching the film, and also the way uh, the author and the character, they changes their roles, and how it is being narrativized in the film. So it was a really enjoyable film. Thank you, sir, for recommending it.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else need to add on? Dalageshwar sir?
Yeah, the film is quite interesting, but I thought it's trying to do too many things. In the what Divya Kusum just pointed out, the retro look. So there are many film industries which have tried this, uh, trying to bring in 70s, 80s look to the present film. So in that sense, it is trying to do that. And then the what allusions and annotations, uh, which are very context specific, would what I would call as it is trying to uh, catch in an intertextuality. A film referring to a novelist, and then the a set of novels, and then the characters coming in there, moving in and out of one fiction to another narrative, and that was also, I thought, quite interesting. And then this trying to historicize it and connect not only literature and the film and the narrative, and also the allusions to the present context here and there, a political context, bomb blast, Buddha laughing, and then trying to relate it to the uh, colonial context through the museum route. Uh, so in that sense, it is trying to do, I thought, too many things. Again, I don't know how many will be able to um, catch all these things that it is trying to do. Because somebody who is not into these things, not only I'm saying it as an outsider to the Bengali literary culture, but even within the Bengali literary culture, I don't know how many would have read it. For example, I was brought up, not brought up, I went through these kind of novels in the 80s when I was a kid. And a lot of these detective novels, Jinde Nandu Swami, Prakash was another detective. So while watching this movie, I was remembering all those detective series. And I was a voracious reader. I used to read 2 or 3 such novels in a day, just to have a kind of discussion with friends that what happens here, what happens that. If they tell me that, have you read this? Oh, I would have read that. I wanted to just say like that. But many of them did not touch me in a real sense. Though it cultivated a certain kind of reading habit in me. Similarly, this movie too, it fails to touch you anywhere because it's trying to do too many things. I don't know what was the reception in the Bengali context, whether people who were familiar with the allusions, the references, intertextuality, they jumped into discussion, or was it also a popular reception from the current audience? That I would like to know more about it. Uh, that's all. I think it's an interesting experiment. I am more interested in knowing how these experiments are received, apart from the allusions and the intertextuality, which is very thick, I think. And Parichay also said about Gautam Badra working on Bartola literature, and then certain kind of interest in this kind of literature in the last 20-25 years in the Bengali research culture. That they might be interested in uh, trying to look at their own research in terms of this particular author and his repertoire. Uh, but how others have received it is something that I'm curious to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tarkisha. So yeah, actually, the film was not commercially very successful. when it was running in the theaters, but it created a deeply divided audience. People either hated it or they loved it. Most of the newspaper reviews were all in praise for its daring experimentations. And it's interesting that it is produced by SC, Sri Venkatesh Films, the largest production house in Bengal, the most well-known popular production house. They own the largest Bengali, the most popular Bengali OTT or VOD platform as well, Hoichoi, where the film was released after its theatrical run was completed. So it's interesting that the filmmaker could take this risk and got it released in popular chains. It was not very successful, and yet the film has been produced by a hardcore commercial business house, the largest film production house in Calcutta. So that way it's interesting. Because they probably make their money in other films, more popular works, so they wanted to invest some money into it. Probably knowing it fully well that it may not recover its costs. But ever since it became available on OTT channels and other platforms, people started talking about it, sharing it. Those of us who live outside the state and could not catch it up when it was running in the theaters, obviously we had to watch it on OTT. I would have been, much more glad to catch it up in a film theater. I would have loved that theatrical experience with this film, which did not happen. But I can see that, we should sort of, the film, I agree with Professor Tarukeshwar. The film tries to do a lot of things, and at times it may frustrate its audience because of that. Especially the first 15-20 minutes, it makes you really puzzled about what is actually happening. Then gradually it takes off, literally and metaphorically takes off. But at the same time, I would say it's commendable that it is funded by a commercial popular production house, and it was released in the theaters. It ran for some time at least, and then it created its own kind of fanboyism, if I'm allowed to use the term, when it came to the OTTs. So it's those who are interested in this, platform cultures, as we call it in film and media studies nowadays, how things change, the viewership and things associated with the viewership, they change when it comes to platform cultures nowadays and how things work. That would actually create a very different thing. So that's it. But yeah, you are right. It was not commercially very successful, especially those who were familiar with Shapon Kumar's stories. Some of them found the film quite outrageous. They expected quite a literal adaptation, more like a locally produced, low-budget 007 kind of film they expected. When they didn't get it, they were quite mad at the film. But others who were interested, who thought about it as a kind of pastiche, they liked it despite its flaws. Obviously, the film has its flaws. So that's it. It created a deeply divided audience, I must say.
If I can chip in, it also sounded some of the comments, meta comments on such narratives was also a comment on, I thought, popular South Indian movies, especially Telugu and then Hindi, Tamil movies, where Rajinikanth will do a lot of things which are beyond reason, kind of thing. So it's a kind of spoof. And then why do we watch them? Is though we know that it belies our logic and reason, it's a kind of, when it comes as a meme, we also like it. So we know that it is not logical or reasonable, but still we like to see such things. So as you were saying, it might pick up and there might be a new kind of taste, a new kind of generation which has this kind of taste. They don't believe it, but they would like to see it. It's a kind of spoof. We have a penchant for that too, to laugh at. And basically, it's an entertainment in that sense. So we would love to see it, but that's why I was interested in the reception part of it, because that would indicate whether there is a certain kind of aesthetic that is set in the Bengali viewership, whether they are lapping it up or whether it's said to be formed. In that sense, so I was curious to know about the readership. In Telugu and Tamil, yes, we would do watch it. We know that one fellow beating up 50, 60 people or in one sound, he can shatter everything. So in that sense, we would love to see it. So we do make fun of it, but we do love to see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dalakrishan. Yeah, so actually, as you mentioned, this idea of spoof film, yeah, it reminds me of a film that, that quite unusual, an extended spoof of a film that came unusually from none other than Apichatpang Veerasa Thakul. Veerasa Thakul is better known as a powerhouse of, auteur cinema in global festivals. But in his career, he made one film mocking the conventions of popular Thai cinema. It's called The Adventures of the Iron Pussy. Watched it many years back. That's the only film in his entire career that is which is an extended spoof and that mocks all popular conventions of Thai action and erotic films. Yeah, and one more thing. So this film keeps on, taking a dig at many canonical figures of Bengali culture, Rabindranath, of course, and also Satyajit Ray in multiple ways. So as I said, it keeps on talking, mockingly about the two detectives of Bhadralok culture, Sharadindu's Bomkesh and Satyajit Ray's Feluda. As it rightly points out that these Bhadralok detectives, they have a gathering towards the end of the story where they pick up the criminal, as it exactly happens in Satyajit Ray's Feluda stories. Also, as I have just been reminded of by one of the audience here in a message, that sequence, as I refer to this Phule Phule Dhole Dhole Tagore song being used bizarrely, that might also be, of course, the Tagore song being taken out of the Bhadralok context here. That might also be again a dig at Satyajit Ray. Satyajit Ray used that song in Charulata. So Charulata credit sequence, throughout the credit sequence, you can hear Phule Phule being played, right? No, sorry. In Charulata, the credit sequence had Momo Chitte, but Phule Phule was there in Charulata, that garden sequence. So throughout the film, yeah, where Madhavi Mukherjee as Charulata sings the song, yes. So throughout the film, it keeps on, mockingly referring to, satirizing these, iconic figures of Bhadralok culture.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else need to add on?
May I, Krishnapya?
Yeah.
Hello, sir. Thank you for this discussion. It was a wonderful film. I'm a huge fan of Bengali detective novels, and it started with Pandav Goinda by Shashti Bhattacharya, then came like Cornell or Bomkesh or Satyajit Ray, Feluda, and other characters. But I was never suggested reading Shapan Kumar, and I was never gifted Shapan Kumar. Maybe that happens when a writer does not get canonized and he stays in the periphery. So it was only in my master's when I found out Shapan Kumar on my own, and that's too not any very posh bookstall, but in a stall that is beside like a small bus stop. Yeah, so the vendors are selling it, and I get to know Shapan Kumar through that, and it was very interesting. But my question is that, and I want to borrow from what Divya sir and Nikhila ma'am already told. Like when I watched the film, I felt that it was as if Debaloy Bhattacharya was entering into the writer's mind. I mean, for me, there exists only one character in the film, that is Shapan Kumar himself. Nothing has happened. What is happening is that the writer is writing a novel, And Debaloy Bhattacharya has entered the writer's mind, and he was showing us the process of writing this novel. That's how I managed to understand why the writer is all talking to the character, and why this conversation happens, how the character is saying this, no, you write this, this is not going with my plan or my understanding, my goal. So, and if I look at the title also, like Shri Shopan Kumar Badami Hyenar Kobole, it also tells me that it is about writing a novel. Shri Shopan Kumar is writing a Badami Hyenar Kobole. And that's why maybe the director has used those visual elements, I mean neon lights or those scene repetitions, because our mind does not work in a linear way. So to show how our mind works, maybe we need these very extravagant visual elements to depict how Shopan Kumar is actually writing this character. And this is one of the way, if you take I mean, a writer who has not been canonized, and whose I mean, whose creation, whose detective is still not considered a Bhadralok detective, then by entering into his mind, you have the position of criticizing this Bhadralok mentality. So is it my question is that is my thought process is right? Is Debaloy Bhattacharya doing that by entering into Shopan Kumar's mind? Although I have not read the novel, so I don't know how much the film has deviated from the novel, but I thought that it is one of the way to critique the Bhadralok culture or our Bhadralok understanding of how a detective should be.
Thanks for the question, Tanmoy. It might well be that you did not get Shopan Kumar's stories to read, primarily because for a long time they were not that easily available, not in circulation. Like, I'm not talking about these old chapbooks that you know, the generation from the 60s and 70s used to read. Obviously, they have become, you know, collector's item nowadays. But this compilation of Shopan Kumar's detective stories, and that has come out from you know, quote unquote respectable publisher, Lalmati. Lalmati grabbed the opportunity. They understood that there will be a wider reading public because this is vintage now. It will sell. So they compiled the stories and came up with Shopan Kumar Samagra, you know, the collected works of, or the kind of omnibus of these crime stories. So, but for a long time, such books were not really in circulation, if I'm not mistaken. Now, as you were saying, as you said, you are familiar with Bengali detective crime stories. I think, see, there has always been these two parallel streams. On one hand, we had Sharobindu and Satyajit Ray and Nihar Ranjan Gupta and several others writing. So it's like Nihar Ranjan Gupta's Kiriti, which is, you know, the setting is modeled after that of many of Agatha Christie's novels, to be honest. So you can see that the Bhadralok detective very much in action in such stories. That stream remained for a long time. At the same time, as I mentioned, in the 19th century, during Botswana print culture's heyday, such pulp fiction started coming out, like, say, early 20th century works of this Shashadhar Gupta, right? Doshu Mohan, who used to write Doshu Mohan stories, and even before that, Panchkori De and Priyonath Mukherjee. So these quote unquote cheap, hard-boiled crime fiction used to be associated with that Botswana print culture. And we can consider Shopan Kumar as a continuation of that. He's part of that wider stream of writing. So this film, there's a sequence where Paran Bandyopadhyay, who is playing the role of Shopan Kumar, he mentions that I am the first pulp fiction writer in Bengal, which is not true. This is historically untrue. He is definitely not the very first. He is the most prolific, but not the very first. So I would say there has always been this idea of having two streams of literature, the mainstream of crime fiction and this subaltern stream of crime fiction, if I'm allowed to use that well-known word. But that is the case in many other places as well. I mean, outside the purview of quote-unquote respectable literature, there will always be such, you know, subterranean flows for the consumption of a very different kind of reading public. And I think the filmmaker has done a very important job. I'm not saying that it is entirely without flaws, or I'm not saying that it's very, very successful throughout the film. No, there are flaws, obviously, as it happens. But at the same time, the film addresses the existence of this subterranean stream, which remained unacknowledged by literary canon in general.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else need to add on?
Yes, hi sir. Thank you so much for your talk. It was very, very wonderful. I just wanted to, several people have already talked about this, and I found it very interesting how logic and lack of logic really worked out in this film. So something that I like was how this at a certain point they are saying how people use their culture to kick us out. So, so us here, meaning this kind of genre of pulp fiction, uh, something that stuck out throughout the film. There are these uh, sort of like I saw poems, Mahabharata, Shakespeare, ballad, epic, and how this stuff. It's as to say yes, I know this, but so what? So what is culture? And are you saying that this is not culture? This kind of binary uh, that exists, and the comment the film kind of makes on this I found really nice because and at a certain point he's saying the detective sort of tells the writer, add Tagore's poem, add riddles that can't be solved, add history, then your work will be big. And and something that
Sorry, Sneha,
am
I
I
think I
audible?
lost your voice. Yeah, now you are audible. Yeah, for a while we lost your voice.
I'm sorry. I was just talking about how at a certain point the detective sort of tells the writer, add Tagore's poem, add riddles that nobody can solve, add history, and that will make your work great. And despite adding all these elements throughout the film, something that really makes this film or strikes a chord with me is the lack of logic. So the how he adds on these elements, and still it is not these elements that make this film really stick with the viewers. So I think that sort of, and the dreamlike element of the film. So it's almost like a fever dream, but as everybody has said, like very absurd and very very interesting in that sense. So yes, thank you, sir, for this.
Thank you. This good that you referred to this dreamlike, oniric aspects of the film. And those of us who are into cinema studies, we often think of this, how films become dreamlike, or films, come up with certain kind of dreams, repeat them. So I think I concluded my introduction with that idea of, repetition of a fantasy that the audience may have, and how repetitions occur in a film. In fact, films are mostly about, many films are about different kinds of dreams. This is what Laura Rascaroli and others wrote on it, film scholars. Um, certain genres are associated with certain kind of dreams. This is what Rascaroli wrote on. So I'm not going towards that domain, just wanted to refer to it. But see, this is about how a reading public is formed, and that's why Swapan Kumar remained banished. Like, I was reading quite a few newspaper reports on Swapan Kumar, how his surviving family, like his only son, passed away. That led to disputes over copyright claims, as I mentioned. But others remain in the family, the extended family, his daughter and others, and I think grandchildren. So they are very upset about the fact that Swapan Kumar was not given his due. He never became part of the literary canon, never earned as much as he should have earned, even though his books sold a lot. But he always handed over the copyright to his publishers for a meager sum, as he wanted that kind of money after the partition. They didn't have much resources. At the same time, reading Swapan Kumar was looked down upon in Bengali middle class families. People knew that the school kids, they developed irresistible attraction to this kind of stories. But it was really looked down upon by the elders. They used to rebuke the kids, asking them not to read such stories. Instead, in fact, it was mentioned in quite a few newspaper reports, not on the film, but on Shrapan Kumar in general. After Shrapan Kumar passed away and his compilation of his works came out in recent times, that quite a few Bengali literary figures, they recounted how in their childhood days they were sort of asked by their parents and elders not to read Shrapan Kumar, rather boycott him and read respectable detective stories instead, like Sharadindu and Satyajit Ray for that matter. In fact, one of the major Bengali literary figures, Shishendu Mukherjee, he mentioned in his interview that I never read Shrapan Kumar. I tried reading some of these stories, but I found them, absolute trashy, illogical, irrational, poorly written, having no literary merit. So I never tried reading them after that initial experience. So, and I'm talking about a recent interview. So you can see how that kind of conservatism that cannot associate certain kind of literary taste with a certain kind of privilege. So that persists, that notion persists. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Can I come in?
Yes, Ananya.
Am I properly audible? I'm operating a little differently. So am I properly audible?
Yeah, you
You
are.
are audible.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much, sir, Parichay, sir, again, for taking out your time for all of us, and also for the suggestion of a movie which I think can captivate the attention of a child as well as an adult and somebody who is into senescence, an old aged person as well. I also enjoyed the movie much as the movie had me in the grip of uncertainty, because I couldn't tell even once what was going to happen ahead of the movie. But out of all these things, I will kind of consent with Tarakeshwar sir here that the movie also felt at times like that was clouding with a lot of things, kind of juggling with a lot of things at the same time. One of the facets which kind of which somehow drew my attention more critically towards the movie was with the element of action that the movie uses, and I'm aware that this is something which is kind of typical of, I think, Indian cinema, that we have this type of sequence of actions, especially if the movie has to involve a detective. So that was kind of expected, but that just seemed like with the concept of the atomic explosion and a child trying an atomic mushroom, something that just felt so innocent in the way that the storyteller, the director, and simply the people in the movie, they were trying to tell how a child interpreted these terrible human actions. So my question will be, out of all these things that are kind of coming out in a ramble from my end. So my question will be directed to the agency of the writer. So we've been somehow taught and told that this is the writer. There's a lot of controversy sometimes, and sometimes a lot of discussion that go into the discussion of a novel, of a book, as something which the author cannot entirely, and sometimes can be entirely detached from. So there's a concept of free indirect speech when this comes to novels, Austen's novels as well. So there's a moment in the movie when the hero is dying, and they admit that whatever they do, this is only at the hands of a writer. this is really the writer who gets to eventually tell what is going to happen, and we see this agency in practice of the writer when at one of the moments of the movie, there's the heroes trying to go ahead past the tunnel in the bike, and the author just simply kind of manipulates that by emptying the bike from the fuel. So my question will be, what are your views on how the movie paints that, kind of portrays or passion surrounding the authorial agency with the author's own characters?
Thank you for the question. In fact, we have been discussing this for, this discussion came up in a few other questions and my responses to them, how the film creates a certain kind of repetitive structure, quite intentionally. And the free indirect discourse that you referred to, it's part of that. Thank you for sort of coming up with the term, referring to this particular term. And as I tried to explain earlier, this idea of the authorial agency and the constant contradictory viewpoints that the character expresses, how that might also be a hint towards the filmmaker. This is entirely my point of view. Filmmaker, departing away from Tapan Kumar's original work, creating ideologically something very different. So this is my explanation. Of course, it keeps on bantering, keeps on playfully reminding of certain so-called follies and flaws of Tapan Kumar's stories, and that's how the hero keeps on challenging the authorial voice, constantly intruding into the narrative making process. And not only the hero, we can see that many other figures intrude, including the cat. The cat, that sets the ball rolling in a certain way, and then that candle falls on the unfinished manuscript and it starts getting burned, right? That sequence. So we can see many modes of intervention, but in a very tongue-in-cheek way at times, but that does not prevent us, I would say, from thinking about how the filmmaker himself has drifted away from Tapan Kumar's specific ideological standpoint, which obviously he made for the publicity of his stories, to ensure a better sale. After, as I said, after the Sino-Indian War, the hyper-nationalist narrative for young adults back then. But here, Debaloy Bhattacharya has done something completely different. And the film is not commercially successful, as I said. It was not meant to be honest. And at the same time, it is a take on the Bhadralok's rejection of certain kind of print culture, referring to it in a satirical way. And then the film is released for the consumption of a largely middle class audience who are discussing it and sort of countering that narrative or siding with the narrative, whatever. As I said, it left a deeply divided audience. But at the end of the day, I would say it adds to the larger historical narrative in its own way. So as Professor Tarokeshwar asked about Gautam Bhadra's work on it, Gautam Bhadra wrote a book on Bottala print culture, as I mentioned, for which he won a major literary award in Bengal, Ananda Puruskar. But the book, I don't think it has been translated so far. I haven't come across any translation of it. So the original book is in Bengali called Nera Bottala Jayakobar. It's a major work by a historian of Gautam Bhadra's stature on this print culture and this specific idea of an underbelly of the city where such popular print culture did thrive once. the 19th century. So yeah, that's my take. That throughout the film, mockingly, the character intervenes, and it creates this sense of this repetitiveness, which was needed perhaps for this film. That's why I quoted Rama Belur, how the idea of repetition is at the heart of cinema itself at times, even in 19th century novels, from where Belur, keeps on referring to that, also to classical Hollywood, experimental cinema, multiple domains that you can think of, repetitions occur. So here we can see that idea of repetition coming back, but at the same time, that is perhaps a comment on the larger cultural politics of Bengal, cultural politics of this particular film, and a certain brand of literary consumption. And it obviously adds to that historical value. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Sanjay, sir, do you have anything to add on? Anyone else? Madhurima, ma'am? Disha, ma'am? Do you have anything to add on? So shall we, as I think no one else is there, so shall we wind up this section? Okay. So first of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation, sir. It was an awesome presentation. And from this section, we got insightful and enriching contributions also. So your perspectives have greatly deepened our understanding of this particular film. So we thank you, all other participants, for the thoughtful questions and other engaging activities to make this section truly rewarding. A big thank you to everyone who helped to make tonight's discussion a success. Until we meet again, stay curious and keep exploring movie. So, thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Parichay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night. I'm so glad that this happened and many of you watched it and you liked the film. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay then. Bye. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.